Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about south and Donetsk direction, about the city or village of Kostyantynivka. I'll remind you that just yesterday we were talking a lot about this territory. We were talking about the posts that were published by the 79th Brigade. Let's take a look at the most important post published by them yesterday. The week-long post ended with the brutal art preparation of the Russians in Kostyantynivka. Since the night, the Russians has begun covering the squares with dense fires, so that we, the 79th Brigade, have dozens of dead, missing, and 300s, which means wounded. Panic began on the outskirts of the village. The only thing is that there were no harsh assaults, but we have lost objective control, and most likely the Russian forces are already in Kostyantynivka. A very difficult time is coming for our brigade, which means for 79th Brigade. So this piece of news was published yesterday, and according to this update, the Russians entered the village itself. And we were guessing when exactly the Ukrainians or the Russians will publish the videos that will confirm this. And today the Ukrainian sources published the video of the biggest attack ever conducted by the Russians since the beginning of the special military operation. The Ukrainians are saying that the Russians were using up to 57 armored vehicles, 12 motorcycles, and more than 200 stormtroopers, the biggest attack ever at once. The Ukrainians stated that as a result of counterattacks, as a result of clashes, they managed to destroy 6 tanks, 7 armored vehicles with the infantry, they destroyed 12 motorcycles, and the Russians lost 40 soldiers. It's not even 25% of the entire number of forces that the Russians were using for this attack. Anyway, as you can see in this video, there are a lot of episodes, a lot of details, and one of the episodes was discovered, found geolocated in this part of Kostyantynivka. So basically the Ukrainians confirmed that as a result of Russian offensive operation, the biggest Russian assault, the Russians managed to enter Kostyantynivka itself, and they began the digging in deeper and forcing the Ukrainians to fall back. So summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that today on the 25th of July, the Russians began the assault of Kostyantynivka, the battle for one of the most important defense chain of armed forces of Ukraine in the south and Donetsk direction. This is very important. Now let's move further. We have additional update from Krasnohorivka from pro-Russian sources. We don't have any updates from pro-Ukrainian or neutral, just from pro-Russian, but they are saying that as a result of active clashes on the ground, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly and to create another cauldron. We are not talking about thousands of Ukrainians, but probably 100 more or less plus minus of Ukrainian soldiers were encircled in the northern part of the city. So as you can see, we haven't adjusted the map because we are not relying on these sources as the, let's say, reliable. But anyway, summarizing everything according to pro-Russian sources, this is approximately the territory that was captured by the Russians in the northern part of Krasnohorivka, and according to the same source, the Russians improved their positions and almost reached Sidova Street using these roads of attack along the western part of Krasnohorivka as well. So these are two roads of attacks that were conducted by the Russians. This is the first one and this is the second one, and as a result of these attacks, we see that significant number of territories, let's say in the northern part of Krasnohorivka, were encircled, and the Russians are saying that currently the Ukrainians who are located between these buildings and streets are no longer available for evacuation, because the streets, let's say Ostrovskova Street, like this Pokrovskaya Street, Chkalova Street, Zhukova Street, are under complete Russian FPV drone control or fire control, and basically the Ukrainians lost once again their possibilities for evacuation. So there are few options for them, either to stay there and to wait the unblocking operation, which most likely will never be conducted by the Ukrainians, or to surrender, or to stay there forever. Now let's move further. Let's talk about Western Avdiivka or Pokrovsk direction. We have additional updates from the village of Vovche. According to different sources, pro-Russian and mainly pro-Russian sources, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over this territory. So Vovche was captured and secured by the Russians completely. According to pro-Russian sources, this is approximately the territory that is already under Russian control. The Ukrainians were forced to fall back from this territory completely. Now the Russians are going to regroup for a while, and then they will move further, most likely in the southern direction, with the purpose to attack Zhelane from the northeast and from the east. Furthermore, we have additional video. In this video, we can see how the Russians discovered the positions of Abrams tanks, and as a result of Krasnohorivka strike, the Ukrainian Abrams tank was completely destroyed. As for the Ukrainians who were encircled, and the topic that we were talking about yesterday, this is the cauldron. According to information we have, a few companies of Ukrainian forces of 31st Mechanized Brigade between Progress and Lazavatska were blocked. During the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything that can give us additional updates or additional understanding of what is going on there. Now let's move further. As for Toretsk and New York agglomeration, we haven't received anything special, just a regular military activity. We are talking about significant number of artillery strikes, FAB strikes, aviation strikes, just a regular, as we discussed, as we told you, just a regular activity without any changes on the ground. Maybe today we're going to receive additional updates, but for now, just the things what we have. Chasiv Yar, nothing special, we're going to move further. Siversk direction, the same situation, nothing special, we're going to move further. Southern Kupiansk direction, we see that the Russians resume their aviation artillery activity. The Russians are bombing the Ukrainian positions, artillery forces, supply roads. This means that most likely during the next few days or during the next few hours, the Russians are planning to resume their attempts to get closer to Zhiribets River. As for northern Kupiansk direction, we have certain activity in the vicinity of Petropavlovka and Sinkovka, nothing special. Now let's talk about Kharkiv direction. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to destroy a very big service center of armored forces of Ukrainian side of Kharkiv. In this video, we can see the concentration, not the concentration, just a regular service center, it's correct to say. We see a significant number of armored vehicles, mainly of Western production. There are tanks, Bradleys, there are different vehicles, hundreds, maybe even tens of them, and as you can see, most of them the Ukrainians weren't be able to use due to some damage or some problems with them, but anyway, most of them the Ukrainians were able to repair in the future, but the Russians discovered this concentration of vehicles and attacked this territory with Iskander. So the service center was destroyed, and obviously this will this will bring significant problems for Ukrainians who are currently trying to attack the Russians in the vicinity of Gluboka or in the vicinity of Volchansk. As for Gluboka, after the Russians stated that Ukrainians abandoned Gluboka completely, they stated that the Ukrainians continue regrouping, continue concentration of forces, they brought additional reinforcements and reserve for 92nd Assault Brigade, and in the very near future, the Ukrainians are planning to restore their attempts to attack the village from many directions. So we'll see what is going to be next. As for Volchansk, we have adjusted the map. We have the video published by the Russian forces, the fresh video. In this video, we can see the Russians were attacking the Ukrainian positions in the southern part of Volchansk with FPV drone, and this video confirms that there are still Ukrainian positions. This territory used to be in the gray zone, not even in contested area, but today we received geolocation. We have compared the maps with different mappers, and we made the conclusion that most likely this part of Vovchansk still under Ukraine control, and there are still very heavy clashes for this territory. As for Staritsa Bugrovatka, during the previous night, the Ukrainians haven't conducted any attempt to attack the Russians due to losses during the previous days. Now the Ukrainians are regrouping, but they will do more attempts, and they will attack Ukraine. Ukrainians will attack Russian positions in the very near future. As for political events, we have few updates about the situation with energy energy facilities, winter in Ukraine will definitely come with blackouts. This was stated by Verkhovna Rada deputy Sergei Nagornik. According to him, a good scenario would be if the winter could be managed with 12 hours with power and 12 hours without. So this is good scenario for the Ukrainians. But obviously the scenario is going to be the worst because, for example, in this small graph, we can see the countries that supply Ukraine with electricity. And according to this graph, Hungary support Ukraine with 38 electricity. So if we calculate everything that Ukrainians buy, 38% comes from Hungary, and 24% comes from Slovakia. So more than half, 50%, which means that due to the conflict between Ukraine and these two countries, both countries, Slovakia and Hungary, can reduce the supply and support to Ukraine till minimal, and then the probably Ukrainians is going to have much more problems with electricity during the winter period of time. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.